Hi, I'm Khanna. I represent Silicon Valley in the United States Congress. And today I am absolutely honored to have two incredible guests, two leaders in our nation. Senator Rob Portman, who represents the state of Ohio. Senator Portman is a leader in having the COMPETES Act, the CHIPS Act, pass the Senate and hopefully get to the president's desk. He has served in the cabinet. He's really seen as an extraordinary person who is bipartisan, who gets things done, an incredible asset to the Senate. And of course, the CEO of Intel, Pat Gelsinger, who was recognized by the president at the State of the Union, an incredible business leader, but someone who just doesn't just care about business and the bottom line, but is motivated by a patriotism to bring production back to the United States. Senator Portman, Mr. Gelsinger, thank you for joining us.
Ro, thanks for having us.
Well, thank you, Ro.
Let me start with this. We're here to talk about the extraordinary vision of Intel putting a new factory, a new plant in Columbus, Ohio. And maybe we can start with you, Pat. Maybe you can tell us, you grew up in rural Pennsylvania. Your parents didn't finish college. Maybe tell us a little bit about your story and what is really inspiring you to do this.
Yeah. Well, I was a rural Pennsylvania farm family, accidentally stumbled into technology, so ended up skipping my last year and a half of high school, got my 2-year degree, and Intel hired me at 18 years old and moved me to California, started as a technician at Intel. Both of my parents, 8th grade, one-room schoolhouse educated, go to college. So working for Intel, finished my bachelor's, master's, and was working on my PhD. So just, the Cinderella story, right, if you would. It just doesn't get better than this if you're an American. And, grew up at Intel. And I had this vision when I was young, right? A young upstart and being mentored by Andy Grove, the famous leader of Intel, to be CEO of Intel. And then after 30 years at the company, I got pushed out. And I was just devastated, right? This was my dream of being the CEO. And then a year and a half ago, I was asked if I'd consider coming back and being the CEO. And it was one of those where we just had our 8th grandchild, life was good, and it was like, oh, man. But I am motivated for 3 reasons to come back. One is rebuild the iconic Intel. This is the most important technology company in the history of the United States. Second is to rebuild the tech industry. And third is to reestablish this on American soil, right, and rebuild the Western supply chain and the technologies and the manufacturing. And, I do think it's, almost a holy calling in that sense, that everything I've done in my career has prepared me for this moment and this leadership opportunity.
It's a great story, an inspiring
Pat
story.
didn't say he didn't waste his time when he left Intel and had to come back. He became CEO of another great tech company. That's where I first got to know him when I was U.S. Trade Representative. So he's been engaged in global tech issues for a long time, and they saw his success at this other tech company, and thought that he'd be the right leader for the challenges we face now.
I have so much respect in Silicon Valley, where Intel is located.
Yeah.
Senator Portman, talk about what you did to help make this possible, because I know you don't brag often, but you were key in getting Intel to be in Columbus, to be part of that. And I think it's just such a wonderful partnership between Silicon Valley, our heartland. What led to that? What were some of the things that contributed to Intel coming to Ohio?
Well, I'm glad that a guy from the Silicon Valley believes we should have a Silicon Heartland, because that's exactly.
Which, by the way, I just say, we owe, right? Here's the Silicon Valley guy saying we need the nation to be Silicon Valley, right? It's really, incredible on your part, Ro, and I just say I am impressed.
Thank you.
Well, we have a lot of great Ohio State engineers who end up going out to the West Coast because they don't have the opportunities in Ohio or the Midwest in general. That's about to change, and it's already changing. We have a number of tech companies that have moved in, but if indeed we have a $20 billion investment from Intel, which is what has been announced, it will bring all kinds of suppliers. So it's great jobs for a few thousand people, and a lot of PhDs, by the way, and other really high-tech jobs. But it's also great for our entire region, and I think my understanding from our conversations, Ro, is that you get this. So we need to spread this around the country. And by the way, it's more cost effective to be in places like Ohio often because our labor costs are a little more on the average rather than on the West Coast high. And we also have just some great people who have a terrific background. So my role has been minimal. The major role, of course, is from the state and the local community being willing to provide some incentives to compete with other states that are offering often even more. And I commend Pat because he looked at this not just in terms of the incentives, which are considerable, and the taxpayers deserve the credit for that, by the way, ultimately, but also because he looked at the workforce and the opportunities in Central Ohio, not just Ohio State, but we have some great community colleges, Columbus State. We have a number of other four-year universities and schools. We have 137 in Ohio, and they all want to be part of this. And I think he's looking more long-term. He can answer the question himself in terms of where he wants to be and the work ethic and the skills level. But I was happy to play a very small role, but it was important to me to do everything we could here in Washington to try to support the reshoring of our technology. As you know, not long ago, 40 years ago, we had almost 40%, 37% of the silicon, of the semiconductor production here in the United States. Now it's down to 12%, and about 90% of the high end are made in Asia in one country. And so we've really lost ground. And we all know this now because we've seen the supply chain issues that have resulted, and because of the lack of reliability and because of shifting during the pandemic, as an example, from automobiles to electronics, and then you try to buy a car. I drove the electric F-150 today. It has a lot of chips in it, and people are waiting in line because the production is not here in this country. So that reliability of production and just as a national security matter, because it's very important for our armed forces as well, it's critically important what Pat is committing to do.
Well, you're certainly right about the talent of Ohio State. I mean, my father-in-law is a Buckeye, so we've got to. So I hear about Ohio State all the time. But one of the points is that the talent is everywhere, right? Talent, and it's not just college graduates. I mean, this is going to create jobs for people in manufacturing and construction. It's almost a revival of that area.
And that was part of our enthusiasm for Ohio. This is a manufacturing state in that sense, and the idea of bringing high-tech manufacturing, it's just like, man, the response that we've gotten from the region, I need the PhDs from Ohio State and the other, tech universities, Purdue and Illinois and Michigan State and so on, they're excited about being in the region. But the bulk of our workers are actually manufacturing workers. But then also the response of the construction. I mean, if we do everything that we hope to accomplish, it's not just these first two fabs, but we hope to continue building 3, 4, 5, up to 8 at this site, we're going to have thousands of construction workers, concrete and electricians and plumbers and so on, working to build out the most advanced manufacturing location. It's building a new city. Right? It's not just starting a new factory. It is supporting that with policemen and school teachers and everything, because every job that we create is essentially 7 to 10 jobs in the community that are established, and then it becomes this magnet for other technology companies to come around, because they need to support us, but they're also seeing the right ecosystem for them to join as well. And obviously, this has been what Silicon Valley, right, has enjoyed for decades now. And establishing those hubs throughout the country, that's powerful.
And it's a great point that these are jobs people can relate to, that their parents have done, their grandparents have done. Senator Portman, you talked about the federal role, and the joke around here is that anything that's bipartisan has to have your name on it. I mean, you were the leader on the infrastructure bill, and here I worked, very proud of the work we did with Representative Gallagher, Senator Schumer, Senator Young, and you were instrumental in getting Competes Act, which has passed the Senate, passed the House. Talk about why you took such an interest in that, your leadership on that bill, what that would mean for the country and what it would mean for Intel in Ohio.
Well, we have a globalized economy, whether we'd like it or not. It's generally been positive, but it has challenges. And one is that we have found ourselves in a situation where we're not competitive with some other countries. They're willing to subsidize far more than we are certain industries. And it's everything from steel and some of the basics to high technology. And particularly with regard to our Asian competitors, they are willing to invest heavily in technology. And semiconductors is among the most important, if not the most important. So that's the reality, the world we live in. And I mentioned earlier, you know, the movement away from the United States. We designed this sector of our economy. Pat helped design, you know, the first semiconductors and Intel, and you mentioned Andy Grove and so on. And to have it then be moved offshore has created these enormous problems, including national security implications. So that's why I was excited about the notion of competitiveness, not just for the CHIPS Act, which is important, but more broadly, how do we make America more competitive? Pat just mentioned me coming in. There's one element of it that says if we're going to spend billions of dollars, which we do, on new research, including at the National Science Foundation, at the Department of Energy, at the NIH, at National Institutes of Health, and elsewhere with colleges and universities, we do have to be sure to protect that research.
And you've led on this part of the bill.
Well, it's very important. We spent 3 years, unfortunately, we found out during an investigation of the Permanent Subcommittee investigations that for 20 years we have virtually been allowing these so-called talent programs, mostly from China, to come in and take some of our best research. And they identify very wisely, you know, the best researchers and the best research, and they have moved it to China, often shortcutting the process. So they've leapfrogged, in essence, us by commercializing that research more quickly than we do, so they get the benefit of it. And the rise of the Chinese economy and the military is partly a result of that. So we've now woken up to that reality. And you saw the Justice Department in the previous administration and in this administration be much more aggressive. And sadly, there have been a lot of arrests. I mean, I'm glad it happened because they should have been arrested, but it shows the degree to which this is a problem. Just last week, we had another professor who was arrested on charges of, again, not acknowledging that he was also getting funded from China and that he was moving some of his research overseas. And so that's one of the issues we have to tackle as part of this. And, you know, we worked with the administration, worked with Democrats and Republicans in Congress to come up with kind of a bipartisan compromise on that. It doesn't go as far as I'd like to see, but it's a good bill. But now the problem is the Senate having passed it on a bipartisan basis, the House then took it up. We had every Democrat in the Senate support it, 19 Republicans, the White House on board. And the House, unfortunately, in my view, has brought back some provisions that are just not going to be acceptable to enough Republicans to get this done unless they're willing to make some adjustments. So both sides need to compromise.
But we need to get this done. I mean,
we need to get this done.
Pat, talk a little bit about why you made the decision to go to Columbus and what the CHIPS Act, this Compete Act, means in terms of your decision to go there and ability to go there.
Yeah, and it was we looked at sites at quite a number of states across the nation, and some 50 different sites that we looked at like 8 different states. And I'll tell you what, Ohio was hungry. They just pursued this. Every time we had an issue, boom, 24 hours later. But it was also the talent. Right? It was also, we needed a big area because this is going to be a massive manufacturing location, big, flat open. We needed something fit for purpose. But it was also then all of the other things. Can we have the roads, the water, the electricity, all of the other support infrastructure to come behind it? And I'll tell you, Ohio just came out on top. I did not expect that going into this analysis. And then, obviously, the CHIPS Act, as we've said from the beginning, that we can go slow and small in Ohio, or we can go big and bold. And that's the difference of the CHIPS Act. Because fundamentally, if I were building these facilities, this is $20 billion in the first tranche, and we would hope to see that grow up to $100 billion over the next decade or so, that if I were building these facilities in Asia, it's 30 to 40% cheaper. Right? Strong government subsidies. And when you're investing $20 billion, 30%, 40% of that is a big number, right? And we're just not cost competitive in the world without some level of incentives. And other countries are moving forward rapidly to bring those to bear, right? We're seeing those in Europe, in India, in China, Korea, Taiwan, Japan. All of these are making those available. So really, it's not a question of subsidies. It's a question of incentives to go drive this rebuilding of this industry. So CHIPS Act is critical for that. But then, to me, it's about bringing the whole supply chain. Right? It's about all the other things that come next to it. The chemicals, the equipment providers, all of those. It becomes this hub of innovation. And that what we've seen in our other sites that we've done is all of a sudden there's a Google facility, a Microsoft facility, an NTT facility, all of these others start popping up all around it in addition to the companies that need to support it. It really does become a tech village at scale. And that's why this is so important, I think. And the reshoring of manufacturing and semiconductors and manufacturing have always been inextricable. It's not like you throw the recipe into the factory and you don't touch it. You are refining it every day as you work on it. It really is an innovation manufacturing machine that we're building.
And even with the CHIPS Act, the incentives from other countries are still more, right? So you're still taking a bit of a leap of faith.
Yeah, it's very much, and Europe has gone very rapidly, stunningly. Here's the complex 27-member European Union who's moving faster than the U.S. is now on their CHIPS Act proposal. And India and China, Korea, Japan, Taiwan have their products in place. Because if you check the congressional record, and Senator Portman, was there ever a vote in Congress that we wanted to get rid of this industry? Never. But there were votes in China, Korea, Taiwan that they wanted this industry, and they've been aggressively incenting it for over 3 decades. And that's how we got from 80% in US and Europe to 20% today. And if we're going to go from 20% to 50% by the end of the decade, the moonshot, that's supported by the President of the US and the President of EU, that moonshot requires explicit incentives, strong policies to be put in place. And we think the CHIPS Act is a great step to get that underway. We think of this as the first domino of many that will follow it.
And Ro, I know you know this because you supported this legislation in the House, but it's a relatively small part of the investment. So you're right, it's less than what other countries do, but it's really about leveraging that federal dollar to create additional private sector investment. And that, I think, is something that has been lost on some of my colleagues who think, the U.S. government's going to, by industrial policy, decide who gets what and create these industries. The industries are going to take a big risk themselves and make the vast majority of the investment. And this is about trying to at least provide enough incentive, both through the direct incentives to the manufacturing of these particular semiconductors in the United States, but also the research money, including basic research, which every country does, and we do too. But we're increasing that amount substantially. Again, we talked about this earlier in terms of protecting that research, which is important, but it's also important to go back and say, how did this industry start? Well, it started in the United States because we had the basic research, and we were able to, get a leg up on other countries. Now other countries have taken the manufacturing, and as Pat said, they've also improved the manufacturing process in certain ways. Luckily, we have an American company and some others, not just Intel, who understand that and are willing to make the investment themselves, both in the people and in the technology, to be sure we're at the cutting edge.
Senator Portman, I was talking to the mayor of Newcastle, Indiana. I don't even know if he's a Republican or Democrat. He told me that there were parking lots near him filled with these pickup trucks, fully assembled, manufactured. They're just waiting for a chip.
Semiconductor,
and they're basically going to waste. And he said this is the urgency of doing something. You've seen a lot of deals get done. Here you have both Senator Schumer, Senator McConnell, both voting for a bill. We passed it through the Senate, passed it through the House. What is it going to take to get this to the president's desk?
Well, it'll take some compromise. The point I was making earlier was that this is a little unusual, and again, I'm speaking as a former House member, so I do understand the perspective of the House, but unusual in the sense that it worked through the Senate on a bipartisan basis. So it's not as if the Senate sent over a Republican product. In fact, 19 Republicans supported it, while 50 Democrats supported it, and the White House supported it. So we made a number of concessions, including some of the areas we just talked about, to get to that point. And then the House took it up, and instead of passing something that was very similar to it in all respects, it's very different in some respects, and adding new things that...
Now, the House Republicans and Senate Republicans are a bit different.
Well, that's true, too. I think maybe one Republican in the House supported it.
Yes,
is that right?
Yeah.
As an example, the House Republicans from Ohio didn't support it, despite their support of what Pat's trying to do, because there were so many additions. So in this case, I would just suggest that it would make sense to look at some of these additions and say, does that really make sense if you want to get to an ultimate product here? Because losing, those 19 Republicans, or losing, enough of them, we need 10 minimum in order to get to 60 votes,
It'd be nice to do something which has true bipartisan.
It'd be much better to keep the 19 and maybe add a couple, but instead if you lose 9 or 10, the bill's gone. And so we have to, I think, look at this one a little differently, maybe some typical bills where, there's sort of a back and forth between the House and Senate that is more fulsome. In this case, the House doesn't object to the fundamentals of the bill, but again, they added a lot that is not supported by Republicans in the House or Senate, and that's what we have to realize. So Pat is aware of this dynamic. He's been trying to do his best to convince
He talks to
people.
everyone, from the president to every senator, every House member.
You have to get to yes, but to get to yes, it's going to require both sides to make some concessions, but particularly the House Democrats to say, this is a bipartisan product already, and so Senate Republicans have already made a lot of concessions, and just to acknowledge that.
Pat, I don't want you to paint a doomsday scenario, but people should know the stakes. I mean, what are the consequences if we can't get this to the president's desk? What does that mean for the Columbus project? What does it mean for Intel in the United States?
Yeah, and if we go back to the numbers that Senator Portman was citing, 37% to 12%, and are we going to go from 12 to 5, right? And at some point, we will lose critical mass on this industry, right? Where you just won't be able to do manufacturing. We've seen other industries totally leave American shores, right? And the inability for them to ever come back. And here, semiconductors. What aspect of your life, Ro, is not becoming more digital? Name it, right? Is your social experience becoming more digital? Mm-hmm. Your education experience, your health experience, every aspect of our lives is becoming more digital. Everything digital relies on semiconductors. So essentially, as I like to say, that where the oil reserves have been for the last 5 decades has defined geopolitics of the world. Where the fabs are for the next 5 decades is more important than where the oil reserves have been. It's that critical to our future. And we've been sliding from 37 to 12, and the question is, do we just lose critical mass? And what I fear is if we don't act decisively right now, and today there's as we've seen through the semiconductor shortage, the COVID-induced semiconductor shortage, there's approximately 30 fabs being built today around the world. Only 6 of those are in American shores. Right? We are falling further behind as we speak right now, of the worldwide semiconductor equipment, of that last year. About 30% of it landed in China, right? And only 8% of it landed in the U.S.
These are the tools to produce.
That's right. This is a leading indicator. Yeah. This is a leading indicator of what manufacturing capacity will be, right? If the equipment is coming there, they're going to go into factories to become, so we are falling further behind today. And my fear is if we get below 10%, even all the things that we're doing at Intel, and of the 12% today, Intel's about half of that. We're about 6%, right, of that 12% today is us in the U.S. If we lose critical mass, we may never have this industry back. And we're going to be asking our Asian friends, and maybe not some friends in Asia, how many PlayStations can I have? How many computers can I have? How many strike fighters can I have? Because we're not going to have the underlying ingredients. So our efforts here, and as I like to say, I almost feel like a Baptist preacher, right? On Easter Sunday, it is time to make some fundamental shifts, because if we don't right now, I fear this train will never pass the station again.
I think it's good. Well said. One thing, Ro, that the data backs up is that research follows manufacturing, which may not be a shock to people, but the reality is, even in the last year, as an example, more research was being done in China relative to the United States because more manufacturing was being done in China. So even though post-COVID we're trying to reshore and shore to more friendly countries, still research follows it. So if we do not bring back this manufacturing, we will continue to erode our research base as well. And that's really dangerous. I mentioned the military. We've had briefings that are classified briefings. I won't get into the specifics, but the bottom line is semiconductors play a huge role. You mentioned the Joint Strike Fighter, but also in assessing the battlefield, in all of the combinations of semiconductors and artificial intelligence and the other technology that's needed to keep America with a qualitative edge in terms of our military. And that's what keeps the peace, ultimately. So it is a national security issue as well.
Senator Portman, you talked about research being linked to production, and one of the icons, Andy Grove of Intel, would often make that point, that we needed a production base to be innovative. One of the things that I think unites the three of us is this belief that we need to produce more things in America, that's important. I actually think it's something that could unite Americans. I want to ask this last question, maybe have you both reflect more philosophically, not just about Intel in Ohio or the Competes Act, but take a broader perspective. I mean, since 1975 is the last time this country had a trade surplus. And we have this huge trade deficit in China. Someone was telling me that the last time there were these huge trade deficits in the 1800s, it actually was one of the causes of the Opium War, that there was a resentment that there was that trade deficit. Talk about what both of your visions are of bringing production, critical next generation production back to the United States. What are the obstacles to it? How can we do it, and how can we do it in a way that inspires all Americans regardless of party?
I mean, I think it's very smart for us to think longer term, and to me, the biggest issue is workforce. So there are lots of issues about technology that are addressed in this legislation. There's also a part of this legislation that encourages, as an example, the Pell Grant, which is a way in which a lot of Americans go to college. If you are a lower income family, you can have your tuition paid for 4 years, master's degrees, PhDs, and so on. But if you want to get a machinist degree, and you talked about, what you're going to need some machinists and some welders to help with the equipment and so on, or truck drivers, or techs, coders, or hospital techs at your father-in-law's great hospital in Cleveland. Those jobs are going wanting right now. I mean, there is a huge skills gap in this country. That's in this legislation too. That would help, because you could then provide Pell for these shorter term training programs that are industry recognized, where you get a certificate at the end of the process. Yeah. I hope that stays in as well. But to me, that's one of our great challenges as a country. If you look at what, again, going to China, but also India, but also other competitors, including in Europe, they're graduating a lot more engineers. I mean, to the point of massive numbers of PhDs, but also other technical vocations where they are saying, we're going to invest in STEM, because we see that as part of the future. And we have a real problem here. And so part of it's immigration. We need to be looking at skills-based immigration, bringing people in. We need people at every level. Part of it is our education system in this country. And so I think it's about trade, it's about making more stuff here, it's about the obvious trade imbalance we have with China now. But ultimately, if we don't have the workforce here, and Pat should speak to this, not me, but companies like Intel are going to say, do I go to Ohio, or do I go to, not Indiana anymore, but India, in this globalized economy that we have. So to me, that probably is the one area where we need to focus more than any other.
There's always been this, industrial policy is a dirty word in the U.S., where, it's just free markets, it's free trade. We don't mind where they go. But clearly what we've seen is the rest of the world doesn't agree with that model. And in fact, that's why this industry has left our shores, right? Because of strong industrial policy. And I think what we've seen as we've been undertaking this work around the CHIPS Act, right, is that there's an appropriateness to think through what our long-term strategy as a nation needs to be. And in the absence of that, we've seen all these manufacturing jobs leave. Did we want these jobs to leave? These are good jobs. It's not like these are bad jobs we wanted to get rid of, right? There's nothing dirty about this industry. It's an extraordinary industry. We want this here, right? And by proper incentives, right, reasonable policy, we can have hundreds of thousands of jobs that are well-paying, that create millions of jobs in this industry and being back on our shores. And we do need skills up and down, right, the skills ladder. Everything from welders, carpenters, concrete layers, et cetera, all the way, through line workers and, who might have associate's degrees like I started with, up through PhDs. It's the full spectrum of jobs for essential industries back on our shores. And the other philosophical point that I've made is a geographically balanced, resilient supply chain. We have, lost focus. If we can save 10 cents by moving jobs to China, we have. We don't want to move these jobs to China, right? And we've seen the implications of having job offshoring, right, when we've now have constrained supply chains. We need geographically balanced, resilient supply chains for the future. And philosophically, that is good policy, right? It's also good politic. as well. And it gives us that ability to work properly. You know, if we're acutely dependent on one country, any issue has to be heavily responded to. If we're not dependent, we can have good, balanced responses to world issues as well.
Well, let me thank both of you, Senator Portman, for your leadership, both on the CHIPS Act and the COMPETES Act, and for your leadership in helping Intel come to Ohio. Pat, for your new patriotism, your new vision of production. I think this is a great example. We could have a great business leader, Republican, Democrat, Senate, House, working together. We can do great things. So thank you for both.
Thanks for having us, Ro.
Thank you, Ro. We appreciate you and what you're doing for us and our nation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.